Hello. Today we are going to talk about the War of 1812, named so because it happened in 1812. Now, this was the second conflict, the second big war, I should say, between the United States of America and Great Britain once again. So there's a few events that were leading up to this war. First off, one of the main causes was the impressment of U.S. sailors. Now, impressment was the policy where British ships would go on in the Atlantic Ocean. They would seize American merchant ships, accuse some of the sailors of being British deserters from the Navy, and take them onto their ships and force them to fight against France or just sail in the Navy. Now, sometimes this was true, but a lot of times it also wasn't. So this infuriated the American community and the congressmen and the senators. Now, another big factor leading up to the war was the westward expansion. Now, the way this had centered was the Americans were pushing westward, colonizing, settling even more, and of course, on those lands were the Native Americans. And what happened was the Native Americans were being influenced in part by the British, and the British were supplying the Native Americans with weapons. One such incident was the leader Tecumseh and his brother, the Prophet, who led a battle against General William Henry Harrison, who would also become one of our presidents later on. Now, this battle happened at Tippecanoe Creek, so it was the Battle of Tippecanoe. And after the battle, they had discovered that there was British weapons that were given to the Indians. So, at the time, there was big cries for war in the Congress, and these were known as the War Hawks, such congressmen as Henry Clay, and they just demanded war of Britain. So the War of 1812 was the very first time that an American Congress had declared war. So at the time of the war, the British Navy had close to, I want to say, 1,000 ships, whereas the American forces only had 17. We were at a little disadvantage there, but the war had begun anyways. So some key incidents in the war include the British actually making it all the way up to Washington, D.C. Now, in the war, they actually got to the White House and they burned it down. President Madison was able to escape with his life, so no harm came to him, but yeah, it got burnt down. Another important battle, I would say, or a significant one, we could say, was the battle at Fort McKinley, where a young lawyer was on board a British prisoner ship. His name was Francis Scott Key, and he noticed that even though the fort was being bombarded, the American flag was still standing in the morning. His notes, his poem, his writings on this incident would later be turned into the Star Spangled Banner that is commonly sung at sports games today. Oh, say, can you see? I'm not a very good singer myself. So, the war had been going on for a while, and they were fighting up to Canada. Actually, they were fighting in Canada. So, in December of 2014, a peace treaty was signed, the Treaty of Ghent. And this basically ended the war, almost ended the war, I should say. We'll get to that in a second. So the treaty was signed, peace was agreed, and went back to the status quo. No lands were exchanged. Now, I say the war went on because in January the Battle of New Orleans happened between Andrew Jackson and his forces and the British forces. This was the biggest battle of the War of 1812, and they kept fighting because communication was pretty slow back then. They had no telephones, obviously. Took news a long time to get out there, and there was no information highway, internet. So that's why the biggest battle happened afterwards. So this really helped launch Andrew Jackson's career, who would go on to become our seventh president. So there's your little summary of the War of 1812. Take care.